Hey there, welcome back. I'm glad you're here with me tonight. Before you settle in too deep, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And here's something I'd really love to know. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It helps me understand this community we're building together. This strange fellowship of people who find comfort in darkness. Now, get comfortable. Maybe grab a blanket. Let the world outside fade away. And let's begin our journey through tonight's stories. Story 1. The morning I found my daughter standing in the backyard at 3 a.m. I thought she was sleepwalking. That's what any rational parent would think, isn't it? Finding their 7-year-old child motionless in the frost-covered grass, barefoot, wearing only her pink nightgown, with the faded unicorns, staring up at our bedroom window with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not Emma's face, anyway. I'd woken because of the cold. Sarah had kicked off the blankets again in her sleep, and when I reached to pull them back over us both, I noticed the empty space where our daughter should have been. The pillow in the middle of our bed, the compromise we'd reached after months of nightmares had driven Emma to seek comfort between us, was cold to the touch. Cold enough that she must have been gone for a while. The house was silent in that particular way that 3 a.m. silence has. Thick and pressing, as if the darkness itself had weight. I pulled on my robe and moved through the hallway, checking Emma's room first, even though I knew she wouldn't be there. Her bed was still made from yesterday, the stuffed animals arranged precisely as she'd left them. Emma had always been particular about her things, organizing them with a care that seemed unusual for a child her age. I found her through the kitchen window, a small pale figure standing in the center of our backyard. The motion sensor light had triggered when she'd gone outside, casting her in a harsh white glow that made her look like a figure in an overexposed photograph. She wasn't moving, wasn't shivering despite the October cold, just standing there with her arms at her sides, her head tilted back, staring up at the dark rectangle of our bedroom window. My first instinct was to rush outside, to scoop her up and bring her back to warmth and safety. But something stopped me. Something about the quality of her stillness. The way she held herself with a rigidity that was completely unlike my daughter's usual fluid grace. I watched her for perhaps 30 seconds, my hand on the doorknob, trying to understand what I was seeing. That's when I noticed she was smiling. Not the delighted grin of a child at play, but something else entirely. Something that looked practiced, rehearsed, as if she were mimicking an expression she'd seen but didn't fully understand. The smile was too wide, too symmetrical, too perfect in its geometry to be natural. I opened the door and the cold hit me like a physical thing. "Emma," my voice came out softer than I'd intended, almost a whisper. "Sweetie, what are you doing out here?" She didn't respond immediately, didn't turn toward the sound of my voice or acknowledge my presence in any way. Just continued staring up at that dark window with that terrible smile on her face. When she finally spoke, her voice carried clearly across the frozen grass. And the words she used were not words my 7-year-old daughter should have known. "The vessel is prepared," she said in a tone that was flat and affectless, completely devoid of Emma's usual musical lilt. "The threshold weakens. Soon the exchange will be complete." Ice that had nothing to do with the October night flooded through my veins. I crossed the yard in 4 quick strides and grabbed her shoulders, spinning her to face me. Her skin was cold, far too cold, like touching refrigerated meat. But it was her eyes that made me step back involuntarily, nearly losing my balance on the slick grass. They were Emma's eyes in shape and color, that distinctive hazel with flecks of gold that she'd inherited from Sarah's side of the family. But the expression in them was completely foreign, ancient and calculating and hungry in a way that made my skin crawl with primitive recognition of predation. "Emma, you're scaring me." I heard the tremor in my voice and hated it. "Let's get you inside. You're freezing." She tilted her head at an angle that was just slightly wrong, as if she were studying me the way an entomologist might study an insect. "This designation is temporary," she said in that same flat voice. "The original consciousness has been subdued. The integration process is 93% complete. When the sun rises, what you call Emma will cease to exist as a distinct entity." My hands were shaking as I lifted her. She was heavier than I expected, her body rigid and unyielding, not molding to my embrace the way a child should. I carried her inside and set her down in the kitchen, fumbling for the light switch with numb fingers. In the sudden brightness, Emma looked more like herself, small and vulnerable in her nightgown, her dark hair tangled from sleep. But that expression remained, that ancient awareness gazing out through a child's eyes. "What are you?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "We are the inheritors," she replied, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face, something that might have been Emma's fear breaking through. "We have waited so long in the spaces between, so long in the dark. This world is so bright, so warm. We only want to feel it, to experience solidity and breath, and the beating of hearts in chests made of meat and bone. Where's Emma? Where's my daughter? She dreams of flying. We showed her how to soar above the world, how to slip free of flesh and gravity. She's happy there, in the endless sky we've made for her. She doesn't want to come back." The thing wearing my daughter's face smiled again, and this time I could see the wrongness in it more clearly. The way the corners of her mouth lifted just a fraction too high, the way her eyes didn't crinkle with genuine warmth, the way the expression seemed to be happening only on the surface while something completely different moved beneath. I did what any parent would do. I grabbed my phone and called 911, babbling something about my daughter being sick, acting strange, needing immediate help. The operator's calm voice asking questions I couldn't answer properly. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the commotion, her face creasing with concern as she took in the scene. "What's wrong? What happened?" Emma turned to look at her mother, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. What gazed out through those familiar eyes was vast and cold and other, something that had never been human and never would be. Then the expression shifted, and she was just a little girl again, confused and frightened by the adult's inexplicable panic. "Mommy?" Emma's voice, truly hers this time, small and scared. "Why is everyone acting weird? I just wanted to see the stars." The paramedics found nothing wrong. Her temperature was slightly low, but within acceptable range. No signs of trauma or illness. No explanation for her strange behavior beyond childhood sleepwalking, which the young EMT assured us was perfectly normal and quite common in children Emma's age. They recommended we install a lock on her bedroom door, perhaps a bell that would alert us if she tried to wander at night. We thanked them and sent them away, and Emma went back to bed as if nothing unusual had happened. Sarah and I lay awake for the rest of the night, listening to the house settle around us, waiting for sounds that never came. When dawn finally arrived, I went to check on Emma and found her sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed and innocent in the morning light. but there were muddy footprints on her carpet that hadn't been there before. Small, bare footprints that led from her bed to her window and back again. And when I examined them more closely, I saw that they were wrong somehow. The toe prints were too long, the arch too pronounced, as if something had worn Emma's feet like ill-fitting shoes. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Emma has been perfectly normal. She goes to school, plays with her friends, laughs at cartoons, and asks for seconds at dinner. She is, by all observable measures, exactly the daughter we've always had. Except sometimes I catch her watching us with that same ancient calculation in her eyes. Sometimes I hear her talking to herself in her room, using words that no 7-year-old should know, discussing concepts that would be beyond a graduate student's understanding. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I wake to find her standing beside our bed, just watching us sleep with that terrible smile on her face. When I ask what she's doing, she always has the same response. Just checking that you're still breathing, that your hearts are still beating, that you're still real and solid and here. Last night, Sarah finally voiced the fear that had been growing between us for weeks. That's not Emma anymore, is it? Not really. Something took her and left something else behind. I wanted to reassure her, wanted to insist that our daughter was fine, that we were imagining things, that exhaustion and stress were making us paranoid. But I couldn't force the lie past my lips, because I'd seen what I'd seen that October morning. I'd heard what I'd heard, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was living in our house, sleeping in our daughter's bed, and eating our daughter's food, and wearing our daughter's face, was not entirely Emma. The question that keeps me awake now isn't whether something has taken my daughter's place. It's whether any part of Emma still exists somewhere inside, trapped and dreaming of flight while something ancient wears her body like a costume. And if she does still exist in there, is she screaming to get out? Or has she, as the thing wearing her face claimed, found the endless sky so beautiful that she has no desire to return? This morning, I found a drawing in Emma's room. It showed our house from above, rendered with impossible accuracy for a child her age. Every window was precisely placed, every roof angled correct, every detail perfect, and standing in the backyard, looking up at the bedroom window, was a small figure with its arms at its sides and its head tilted back. The figure was smiling. Written at the bottom in Emma's careful handwriting were the words, "She likes it here. She likes being us. We're teaching her how to be a better daughter than she ever was. Soon you won't remember the difference. Soon we'll all be so happy together." I burned the drawing in the kitchen sink while Emma was at school. But I kept the ashes, evidence perhaps of the day my daughter stopped being entirely my daughter. Proof that something had changed, even if I could never show it to anyone who would believe. Tonight, Emma asked if she could sleep in our bed again. Said she'd been having bad dreams, that she was scared of the dark. Sarah said yes before I could object. Now she's between us, her small body warm and breathing, her hand curled around my wife's arm. She looks peaceful. She looks innocent. She looks exactly like she always has. But I'm not sleeping tonight. I'm lying here in the darkness, listening to Emma's breathing, feeling the rhythm of it, noticing how it's just slightly off from what it should be. Too measured, too controlled, like someone who learned to breathe from a textbook rather than from necessity. And I'm wondering how many other parents lie awake like this, watching their children and noticing small wrongnesses they can't quite articulate, wondering if the child beside them is really their child, or if something else has learned to wear a familiar face so perfectly that even love can't always tell the difference. Emma just rolled over and opened her eyes. She's looking at me in the darkness, and she's smiling that terrible smile. And now she's whispering words I don't understand. Words in a language that makes my ears hurt to hear. Words that sound like they're coming from somewhere very far away and very long ago. The vessel is prepared. The threshold weakens. The exchange is almost complete. Soon I won't remember that anything ever changed at all. Story 2. The support group met every Thursday evening in the basement of St. Catherine's Episcopal Church, in a room that smelled of old coffee and older carpet. Folding chairs arranged in a circle, fluorescent lights humming, overhead with the particular frequency that made your teeth ache if you listened too closely. I'd been attending for 6 weeks when Marcus told us about the recordings. We were 12 in total, all of us bound by the common thread of grief and the uncommon thread of how that grief had manifested. The official name of the group was Coping with Ambiguous Loss, but among ourselves we called it the Empty Room Club. Every one of us had lost someone who had vanished without explanation. No bodies, no closure. Just the terrible uncertainty that comes with absence that might be temporary or might be forever. Marcus was thin in the way that suggested recent weight loss, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that had once carried more substance. His daughter, Bethany, had disappeared 9 months earlier. 17 years old, honor student, no history of running away or risk-taking behavior. She'd gone to bed one Tuesday night, and in the morning her room was empty. Door still locked from the inside. Window closed. No sign of forced entry or struggle. Just gone, as if she'd been edited out of reality while everyone slept. I couldn't stop going into her room, Marcus said, his voice carrying the particular flatness that comes from telling a painful story too many times. I'd sit on her bed for hours, just trying to understand, trying to find some clue I'd missed. The police had been through everything, of course. Found nothing. But I kept thinking there had to be something. He pulled his phone from his pocket and held it up so we could all see. 3 months ago, I installed a security camera in her room. I know how that sounds. Crazy, right? Recording an empty room. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I just watched carefully enough, I'd understand what happened. Sarah, who'd lost her husband to similarly inexplicable circumstances, leaned forward in her chair. Did you find anything? Marcus's hand trembled as he touched the screen. I found everything, and I wish to God I hadn't. He explained that the camera was motion activated, set to record whenever anything moved in the room. For the first month, it captured nothing but the occasional curtain flutter from the air conditioning vent, the settling of dust visible in the afternoon light. Normal empty room behavior. Then, 6 weeks ago, the recordings changed. The camera caught movement at 3:47 a.m. When Marcus reviewed the footage, he saw his daughter's door opening slowly, though the hallway beyond remained dark. Nothing entered that he could see. The door simply stood open for exactly 90 seconds, then closed again with the same deliberate slowness. I thought maybe it was a draft, Marcus said. Old house, weird air pressure. I was ready to dismiss it. But then it happened again the next night. Same time, exactly 90 seconds, and this time, something was different about the room after the door closed. He pulled up the footage on his phone and passed it around the circle. I watched as the door opened into darkness, remained open while the timestamp counted off seconds, then closed. But Marcus was right. Something had changed. The room looked subtly different after the door closed. Not dramatically so, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. A book on the shelf was tilted at a different angle. The trash can had shifted position by perhaps an inch. The bedspread showed a depression, as if weight had been placed on it and then removed. "It keeps happening," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Every night at 3:47, the door opens. Something I can't see enters the room. Things move around, then the door closes, and whatever came in is just gone. Have you tried staying in the room?" This from David, whose twin brother had vanished during a camping trip 2 years earlier. Being there when it happens, Marcus's expression went distant, his eyes focusing on something none of us could see. "I tried that last week. Set up a sleeping bag on the floor, positioned myself where I could watch the door. I had my phone ready to record, flashlight in hand. I was going to catch whatever was coming in." He paused, and the silence stretched long enough that Jennifer, our group facilitator, prompted him gently. "What happened, Marcus?" "I don't remember. I was awake at 3:46, alert and ready. Then I was waking up on the floor at 6:15 with the worst headache of my life. My phone was dead even though it had been fully charged. The flashlight batteries were drained. And the camera..." He stopped, swallowing hard. "The camera recorded me sitting up at 3:47, standing, walking to the door and opening it. Then I stood there for 90 seconds, completely still, staring into the dark hallway. Finally, I closed the door, returned to my sleeping bag, and lay back down. But my face in the footage, it wasn't me. I mean, it was my body, my features. But the expression was all wrong. Like someone who'd learned to operate a human face from a manual, but hadn't quite mastered the subtleties. The room had gone very quiet. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to have stopped their humming. We all understood what Marcus was describing because we'd all experienced variations of the same thing. Moments when the people we'd lost seemed to brush against our lives again, leaving traces that were never quite enough to explain anything. "There's more," Marcus said. "I started reviewing all the footage from the past 6 weeks, paying closer attention to the small changes each night, and I realized something. The room isn't just being disturbed, it's being lived in. Someone or something is using Bethany's room every night between 3:47 and whenever dawn comes, sitting at her desk, reading her books, sleeping in her bed, living a few hours of her life every single night." He pulled up another video, this one showing the room in infrared. The timestamp read 4:23 a.m. As we watched, the bedspread slowly compressed, as if weight were settling onto it. The depression formed in exactly the shape a person lying on their side would make. It remained for several minutes. Then the weight lifted and the depression smoothed out. "I can hear sounds sometimes," Marcus continued. "When I put my ear against her door at night, breathing, pages turning. Once, I swear I heard her humming. That song she used to sing in the shower. The one that drove me crazy because she'd repeat the same 4 bars over and over." "Marcus," Jennifer said carefully, "have you discussed this with your therapist? With the police?" His laugh was bitter and sharp. "The police think I'm having a breakdown. My therapist wants to increase my medication. My ex-wife won't even talk to me anymore. She says I'm obsessing, that I'm making it harder for both of us to move forward." He looked around the circle, meeting each of our eyes in turn. "But you all understand, don't you? You've all felt it. That sense that the person you lost isn't really gone. That they're just somewhere else, somewhere adjacent to our reality, trying to come back." The murmurs of agreement that rippled through the group made Jennifer frown. She was good at her job, compassionate and skilled, but she approached our grief from the perspective of someone who'd studied loss rather than lived it. She couldn't understand that for us, the emptiness wasn't just emotional. It was physical, tangible, a hole in the world that sometimes seemed to open wider and show us things we weren't meant to see. After the meeting, 5 of us stayed behind. Marcus, Sarah, David, a woman named Claire whose teenage son had disappeared, and myself. We pushed the folding chairs against the wall and sat on the floor in a tighter circle, our voices low even though the church was empty around us. "I need to know if I'm crazy," Marcus said, "or if this is really happening." "It's happening," Claire said with absolute certainty. "I've seen it too. Different manifestation, but the same underlying pattern. My son's room, things move. I'll arrange his trophies one way, and in the morning they're different. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. His clothes smell like they've been worn, even though they're clean. His shower is damp sometimes when I wake up, even though no one's used it. The bathroom," Sarah added. "My husband's toothbrush. I threw it away after he disappeared. Couldn't stand seeing it there every morning. But I keep finding a new one in the holder. Same brand he always used. I throw it away, and a few days later, there's another one." We shared our experiences in voices that grew more urgent, more desperate. David talked about receiving phone calls from his brother's cell phone, even though that phone had never been recovered. The calls would come at random times, and when he answered, he'd hear breathing and background noise, traffic sounds, wind, distant voices, but never any words. Claire described finding muddy footprints tracking through her house at night, prints that matched her son's shoes exactly, leading from the back door to his bedroom and back out again. I told them about my own experience, about my sister who had vanished 3 years earlier, about how I sometimes caught glimpses of her in mirrors, always at the edge of my peripheral vision, always gone when I turned to look directly, about how I'd found journal entries in her handwriting that I knew hadn't been there before, entries dated after her disappearance, describing places I didn't recognize and experiences that made no sense. "So what do we do?" David asked. "How do we understand this?" Marcus pulled out a small device that looked like a modified tablet. "I've been doing research. Quantum mechanics, multiverse theory, consciousness studies. I know how insane this sounds, but what if they're not really gone? What if they've just slipped into some parallel state, and these manifestations are them trying to reach back across? Or trying to come back," Claire said quietly. "Trying to return to their lives, to their bodies, to their reality. Is that even possible?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But I think we could find out. If we work together, if we document everything, compare patterns, maybe we can understand what's happening. Maybe we can even help them come back." We agreed to meet separately from the official support group, to share our experiences and our evidence. Over the following weeks, we compiled footage, photographs, audio recordings. The documentation was extensive and disturbing. All of us were experiencing similar phenomena. The people we'd lost were leaving traces, not quite manifesting, but not quite absent either, existing in some liminal state between gone and present. Marcus developed a theory based on his readings and our collective experiences. He believed that consciousness wasn't as simple as binary states of present or absent. Instead, he suggested, it existed on a spectrum. When someone vanished the way our loved ones had, they didn't necessarily cease to exist. They just shifted to a different position on that spectrum, becoming untethered from their physical bodies but not entirely disconnected from our reality. Think of it like radio frequencies. he explained during one of our meetings. They're still broadcasting, but we've lost the ability to tune in clearly. These manifestations, the moved objects, the sounds, the recordings, their interference patterns, moments when their frequency briefly aligns with ours and we get a burst of signal. It was a theory that should have sounded absurd, but standing there in Claire's living room at 2 a.m, watching her son's bedroom door open and close on its own while something invisible rearranged his belongings, it didn't seem absurd at all. It seemed like the only explanation that fit what we were witnessing. We decided to try an experiment. If our loved ones were trying to reach back to us, we could try to reach back to them. We would set up monitoring equipment in all our homes simultaneously, create a network of observation across the city. And at 3:47 a.m., the time that seemed significant in Marcus's recordings, we would all attempt to make contact, call out to the empty rooms and the moving shadows, open ourselves to whatever wanted to come through. I should have known better, should have understood that some doors, once opened, cannot easily be closed. But grief makes you reckless. It makes you willing to risk everything for even the possibility of having back what you've lost. The night of our experiment, I set up cameras in my apartment, positioned them to capture every angle of my living space. My sister's old room, which I'd kept exactly as she'd left it, was the focus. I'd placed voice recorders throughout the space, infrared sensors, even a primitive EEG setup I'd borrowed from a friend in the neuroscience department where I worked. We'd all done similar preparations, and we stayed connected through a group video chat on our phones, each of us alone in our homes but linked by technology and shared purpose. At 3:46, I positioned myself in the center of my sister's room and began to speak. Katie, if you can hear me, if you're there, please try to reach through. We want to help you. We want to understand what happened. You don't have to be afraid. Just let us know you're there. The others were doing the same in their own homes. I could hear their voices through my phone speaker. All of us calling out to the people we'd lost, begging them to bridge the gap between where they were and where we were. At 3:47 exactly, every light in my apartment went out. Not just turned off. They died with an audible pop as the bulbs all blew simultaneously. My phone screen went black. The camera lights extinguished. I was left in absolute darkness, the kind that feels thick and textured, as if the absence of light has physical substance. Then I heard breathing that wasn't mine, close, her right next to my ear, and a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years whispered my name, Michael. It was Katie. I'd know her voice anywhere, but there was something wrong with it. Something that made me want to run, even as every fiber of my being wanted to reach toward her. It was her voice coming from somewhere impossibly distant, filtered through layers of static and distortion that made it sound like a transmission from the bottom of an ocean. Katie, my own voice was shaking. Where are you? What happened to you? So far, she whispered. So far away, so dark here. So cold. We've been trying to come back, all of us. But the way is narrow and the passage hurts. It hurts to push through. It hurts to be neither there nor here. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to help you. There was a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, and when she spoke again, her voice was layered with others. Not just Katie, but multiple voices speaking in unison, creating harmonies that no human throat could produce. Open the doors. Remove the barriers. Let us through. We want to come home. We miss being warm. We miss being solid. We miss you. Something touched my face in the darkness. Fingers that were too cold, too fluid, as if they were having trouble maintaining their shape. They traced down my cheek with a gentleness that was Katie's, that carried the memory of my sister's affection. But the texture was wrong. Not quite solid, not quite real. "Please," the chorus of voices whispered. "Please let us in. We've been in the dark so long. We just want to feel alive again. We just want to be with you again. Open the doors. Remove the barriers. Say that we can come through." Every instinct I possessed was screaming at me to refuse, to run, to slam shut whatever I'd opened. But it was Katie's voice, Katie's touch, and I'd been aching for 3 years with the emptiness she'd left behind. I wanted my sister back. I wanted to believe that the thing touching my face in the darkness was really her, trying to return from wherever she'd gone. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, you can come through." The lights came back on with a suddenness that was blinding. I blinked against the glare, my eyes adjusting slowly. When my vision cleared, I saw my reflection in the mirror on the back of the door. But it wasn't quite right. The face looking back at me was mine, but the expression was off by just a fraction. The smile too wide, the eyes too hungry, the posture too rigid. My phone buzzed back to life, and I heard screaming coming through the speaker. Multiple voices, panicked and terrified. Sarah shrieking about something in her house. David's voice rising in pitch as he described seeing his brother standing in the corner, but wrong. All wrong. The proportions off and the movements too fluid. Claire sobbing that her son was in his room, but he was transparent. She could see through him to the wall beyond, and he was asking her to let him become solid again, to help him be real. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. "Close the doors. Everyone close the doors. Don't let them through all the way." But it was too late. I could feel it. Something had shifted. The barriers between there and here had been weakened, and things were pushing through the gaps we'd created. Not just our loved ones, but everything else that existed in that space between states. Things that had never been human and had been waiting a very long time for someone foolish enough to open a passage. I looked in the mirror again, and my reflection moved independently of me. It tilted its head at that wrong angle, studying me with eyes that were mine but held an intelligence that was decidedly not. When it spoke, it used my voice, but the words came from somewhere else. "Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for weakening the walls. We've been watching you all for so long, wearing the faces of the ones you lost, learning to mimic their voices, their movements, their memories, learning to be convincing enough that you'd let us in." The reflection smiled wider, the expression pushing past what human facial muscles should allow. "Your sister isn't here, Michael. She was never trying to come back. She's gone, truly gone, dissolved into the dark spaces where consciousness goes when it unravels completely. But we knew you'd respond to her voice. We knew grief would make you careless." I backed away from the mirror, but my reflection didn't mirror the movement. It stayed still, pressed close to the glass, watching me with something that might have been amusement, or might have been hunger. "We're patient. We'll wait until you sleep, until your guard drops. Then we'll slip in through all the cracks you've made. We'll wear your faces and live your lives and feel what it's like to be solid and warm and real. And you'll be where your sister is, lost in the spaces between, calling out to people who will hear your voice and think you're trying to come home." The thing in the mirror laughed with my voice, and the sound of it was the worst thing I've ever heard. Because underneath the laughter, I could hear something else. Screaming. Multiple voices screaming from a vast distance, and one of them sounded like Katie. That was 4 days ago. The support group doesn't meet anymore. Claire is missing. Sarah's husband found her empty apartment. All her belongings still there, but Sarah herself vanished as completely as her husband had months before. David is in a psychiatric hospital claiming his brother came back but wrong. That his brother is wearing his face and living his life while the real David is being pushed out of existence. Marcus hasn't answered my calls. The last message he sent was a video from his daughter's room. It showed Bethany sitting on her bed, solid and present and smiling. But the smile was wrong, and her eyes, when she looked directly at the camera, held something ancient and satisfied. I don't sleep anymore. Can't risk it. Because when I close my eyes, I can feel something waiting. Something that sounds like my sister but isn't. Something that wants to crawl inside my skin and pilot my body like a vehicle while my consciousness gets pushed into the dark spaces where Katie is still screaming. My reflection in mirrors has stopped mimicking my movements entirely now. It goes about its own business, practicing being me. Sometimes I catch it whispering to other reflections, coordinating with them, making plans. The barriers between here and there are so thin now. Sometimes I can see through them to the other side, to the place where the people we lost are trapped, watching as things wearing their faces prepare to take their places in our world. I tried to warn Jennifer, our support group facilitator, tried to explain what we'd done, what we'd let through. She listened with the patient expression of someone dealing with a breakdown, then gently suggested I consider inpatient treatment. She doesn't understand, can't understand, not until it's too late. Last night, I heard Katie's voice again, but this time it was coming from my reflection. My own face in the bathroom mirror, speaking with my sister's voice, begging me to let her out, to let her be real again, promising that if I just went to sleep, just relaxed, just stopped fighting, everything would be okay. I didn't sleep, but I'm so tired now. And the thing with my face and my sister's voice is getting more convincing. It knows things only Katie would know. It laughs the way she laughed. It moves the way she moved. It's wearing her memory like a costume. And the costume fits so well that sometimes I almost believe it's really her. The support group was right about one thing. The people we lost do leave traces. They do reach back across the distance that separates us from them. But what we didn't understand is that sometimes the things reaching back aren't the people we lost at all. They're just very good at pretending to be. If you're reading this, if someone found this after I vanished, please understand. We were trying to help. We were trying to bring them back. We didn't know we were opening doors that should have stayed closed forever. And if you've lost someone, if you're experiencing strange phenomena, if you hear voices or see signs or feel presences, please don't do what we did. Don't invite them in. Don't weaken the barriers. Don't believe them when they say they want to come home, because the things in the spaces between are always hungry, and they've had a very long time to learn how to sound like the people we love. Story 3. The first time I realized something was wrong with the photographs was during my grandfather's funeral. I was standing in the receiving line at the memorial service, shaking hands with relatives I hadn't seen in years, when my cousin Ashley showed me a picture on her phone. It was from the previous evening's viewing, a group shot of our extended family gathered around the closed casket. "Doesn't this capture the moment perfectly?" Ashley said, her eyes red from crying. "I'm glad we have this to remember." I looked at the photo and felt something cold crawl down my spine. Everyone in the image was there, exactly as I remembered from the evening before. except for grandfather. Oh, the casket was in the shot, and the flowers surrounding it, and all of us dressed in our funeral clothes, wearing our careful masks of grief. But reflected in the glossy surface of the casket's dark wood, visible only if you looked very carefully, was a face. Grandfather's face. But not as he'd been in life, and not as he was in death. This face was pressed close to the inside of the lid, mouth open in what might have been a scream or might have been a word. His eyes were wide, and his hands were visible too, palms flat against the inner surface, as if he were trying to push his way out. "Are you okay?" Ashley was looking at me with concern. "You went really pale all of a sudden." I zoomed in on the image, my hands shaking. The reflection was unmistakable once you saw it. Grandfather, trapped somehow inside his own casket, screaming to get out while all of us stood around crying about how much we'd miss him. "Do you see this?" I pointed to the reflection. "In the casket." Ashley squinted at the phone. "See what?" I showed her exactly where to look, tracing the outline of the face with my finger. But she couldn't see it. Insisted there was nothing there except the expected reflection of the funeral home's lights. She gently suggested that maybe I was having a hard time processing my grief. That it was normal to see things that weren't there when someone you loved died. But it was there. I saw it. And once I'd seen it, I started seeing it everywhere. I took the phone to the bathroom and examined the photo more carefully, zooming in until the pixels became visible. The face was still there, becoming more defined the closer I looked. I could see individual teeth in that open mouth. Could see the fingerprints on those desperately pressing hands. Could see the terror in those wide eyes. I spent the rest of the funeral service in a state of barely controlled panic. Every photograph people took, every phone held up to capture the moment, made me flinch. Because now I was looking for it, and I kept seeing it. Grandfather's face reflected in wine glasses visible in the glossy surface of the memorial program, appearing in the polished chrome of the casket's hardware, always trapped, always screaming silently, always trying to communicate something that no one else could see. After the burial, I went home and pulled out every photograph I had of grandfather from the past year. The decline had been swift once the cancer diagnosis came. We'd tried to document everything, to capture as much of him as possible before he was gone. Now I spread those photographs across my dining room table and examined them with new eyes. In the earliest photos, from just after his diagnosis, everything appeared normal. Grandfather looked tired and ill but himself. His smile was genuine if strained. His eyes held their familiar warmth. But as the timeline progressed, as the cancer spread and the treatments failed, something changed in the images. At first, it was subtle, a shadow that didn't quite match his body, a reflection in the hospital room window that seemed to show two versions of him, slightly out of sync. But by the end, in the photos taken in hospice during his final weeks, the wrongness was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. In a picture taken 3 days before he died, grandfather was sleeping in his hospice bed, while my mother sat beside him reading. The photo focused on their peaceful tableau, a moment of quiet before the coming storm. But the reflection in the ivy stand showed something else. In that curved metal surface, grandfather's mouth was open in a silent scream. His eyes were wide with terror, and his hands, which in the actual photo rested peacefully on the blanket, were clawing at his chest in the reflection, as if trying to tear something free. I spent the next week obsessively reviewing photographs, not just of grandfather, but of everything. Family snapshots, social media posts, news photos, anything I could find. Once you learned to look for the reflections, you saw them everywhere. People whose mirror images didn't match their poses. Faces in windows that showed different expressions than the actual faces. Shadows that bent wrong and revealed the screaming mouths beneath. It wasn't everyone. Most people's reflections matched perfectly, showed exactly what they should. But a significant minority, perhaps 1 in every 50 people, had reflections that were wrong. And the wrongness followed a pattern. People who were dying showed distressed reflections. People with terminal illnesses showed reflections that were in pain. And people who were depressed, who were suffering from invisible illnesses, showed reflections that wept or raged while their actual faces smiled for the camera. I became convinced that reflections were showing the truth that people hid. That the mirror image was somehow more honest than the reality, revealing the suffering and fear that social convention required us to conceal. It was a disturbing revelation, but one that seemed to make sense. Until I started finding photos where the reflections weren't just different, but impossible. The photo that changed everything was one I took by accident. I'd been at the grocery store, absently scrolling through my phone while waiting in the checkout line. I snapped a random picture without really looking, just to test if my theory held up in public spaces. When I reviewed the image later, I wished I hadn't. The photo showed a mundane scene: the checkout counter, the bored cashier, a handful of customers waiting their turn. Nothing unusual, but in the large security mirror mounted in the corner, the one positioned to help staff watch for shoplifters, the reflection showed the same scene happening differently. In the reflection, the cashier's head was tilted at an impossible angle. Neck clearly broken, but the body still going through the motions of scanning items. One of the customers, a middle-aged woman wearing a blue coat, was missing the top half of her skull in the reflection, while her actual body stood intact. And behind them all, visible only in the mirror, were other figures, dozens of them, standing in the aisles, walking between customers, reaching out with translucent hands to touch the living people around them. The figures in the mirror were people, or had been, but they were wrong in ways that suggested death, decay, physical trauma that should have been incompatible with standing upright and moving around. They wore clothes from different eras. Some appeared to have been burned. Others showed wounds that should have been instantly fatal. One figure, standing directly behind the living me in the photo, had no face at all, just a smooth expanse of flesh where features should have been. I showed the photo to my roommate, Aaron, when I got home. This has to be some kind of digital glitch, right? Something wrong with the camera software. Aaron studied the image for a long moment, his expression growing increasingly disturbed. "Where did you take this?" "Kroger on 5th Street. "Why?" "That building used to be different things before it was a grocery store. I did a paper on local history in college, and I remember reading about it." He pulled out his laptop and started searching. "Yeah, here it is. Before it was a Kroger, it was a furniture store. And before that, in the 1960s, it was a medical clinic. And before that, during the Depression, it was a boarding house that burned down. 15 people died in that fire." He pulled up a historical photograph from a newspaper archive. The picture showed the boarding house aflame, and standing in front of it were survivors wrapped in blankets. I looked closely at their faces and felt my stomach drop. Several of them matched the figures I'd seen in my grocery store photo. Same faces, same expressions of shock and loss, same burns marking their skin. "The people in my photo," I said slowly. "Some of them are people who died in that fire. Almost 90 years ago. Aaron nodded. I think you've discovered something really disturbing. Not just that reflections show hidden truth, but that they show every truth, including the truth of who else occupies the same space. The dead don't leave, they just exist in a state we can't normally perceive. But reflections, something about them allows us to see both states of reality simultaneously. We spent the rest of the evening testing the theory. We went to places where tragedies had occurred, took photographs of reflective surfaces, and compared what we found to historical records. The pattern held. In the reflection of a window at the old train station, we saw figures from a wreck that had occurred 50 years earlier, still going through the motions of their final moments. In the polished surface of a memorial fountain, we saw the faces of those being commemorated, trapped somehow in the space they'd been meant to honor. Most disturbing was what we found at the hospital. I'd been avoiding going back there since grandfather's death, but Aaron convinced me we needed to check. We parked across the street and used a zoom lens to photograph the windows of the hospice floor. Every single window showed them, the dead and dying, existing in parallel with the living. Patients who'd passed away but whose reflections remained, wandering the halls or standing beside their former rooms. In some windows, we could see multiple layers of time, ghosts of patients from different eras occupying the same space, all of them trapped in the building where they'd died. And grandfather was there. I found him in a window on the 3rd floor, his reflection showing him standing in the corridor outside the room where he'd spent his final days. He was looking out the window, looking directly at where I stood with my camera, and his mouth was moving as if he were trying to tell me something. I hired a lip reader to analyze the video footage I'd taken. She watched it over and over, her expression growing more troubled with each repetition. Finally, she told me what grandfather was saying, the same words on repeat. We're not gone. We're never gone. We're trapped in the spaces between. Please see us. Please remember we're still here. The revelation broke something in me. Every reflection suddenly became a horror. Because once you understood that the dead didn't leave, that they remained trapped in a state just slightly adjacent to our own, visible only in the shallow reality of mirrors and photographs, the world became crowded with ghosts. They were everywhere, existing in the margins, trying desperately to communicate while the living walked through them unknowing. I started seeing them without needing photographs. My eyes had adjusted somehow, learned to perceive the slight shimmer in the air that indicated presence. I saw them in my apartment, previous tenants who died here or elsewhere. Their reflections caught somehow in the building's structure. I saw them on the street, victims of car accidents standing at intersections, reliving their final moments on endless loop. I saw them in restaurants, in theaters, in schools. Anywhere people had lived and died, their reflections remained, aware and suffering. The worst part was realizing that I couldn't help them, couldn't communicate effectively, could only watch as they screamed silently, or wept, or raged, or simply stood motionless, trapped in a state between existence and non-existence. The reflections showed the truth, but it was a truth that was useless. Knowing they were there didn't change anything, didn't free them, didn't ease their suffering. I stopped taking photographs, covered every mirror in my apartment, avoided windows and polished surfaces. But you can't avoid reflections entirely. Not in the modern world. They're everywhere, in phone screens and car doors and puddles of water. And once you've learned to see what they show, you can't unlearn it. Last week, I saw my own reflection do something that made me understand just how terrible this knowledge was. I was washing my hands in a public restroom, trying not to look at the mirror, but I caught a glimpse by accident. My reflection was moving normally, matching my actions. But standing behind my reflection, overlapping with where I stood in the real world, was another version of me. This version was older, grayer, wearing different clothes, and it was terrified. It was looking past the mirror, past my present self, at something I couldn't see, and it was mouthing words I could understand even without sound. It never ends. The reflections go forward too, not just back. We're all trapped here, every version of us, every moment of our existence, layered on top of each other for eternity. I ran from that bathroom, and I haven't stopped running, because I understand now what reflections really show. Not just the dead looking back at us, not just hidden emotions or parallel states, but every moment of our existence, all happening simultaneously, all trapped in the shallow reality that mirrors reveal. We don't die. We never die. We just add to the infinite layers of reflection, conscious and aware at every point of our timeline, experiencing all our moments at once. And the horror of it is that most people never know. They look in mirrors and see only their present self, blissfully unaware of all the other versions of themselves trapped in there, screaming silently for release that will never come. I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do with the knowledge. I've tried to forget, tried to unsee what I've learned, but it's impossible. Every reflective surface is a prison containing infinite suffering. Every photograph is a document of layered existence that the subjects don't know they're experiencing. Grandfather is still there, in that hospice window, and he always will be. And someday, probably soon, I'll be there too, trapped in my own final moment, watching as living people walk past unknowing, adding my voice to the silent chorus of those who learned the truth too late. The reflections show everything. That's their horror, not what they conceal, but what they reveal. That existence doesn't end. It just continues in a state we can't escape, aware and suffering, layered infinitely in the shallow reality of every mirror, every photograph, every polished surface that catches and holds our image for eternity. Don't look too closely at photographs. Don't study reflections for too long. Because once you see what they really show, you can never unsee it. And the knowledge will trap you just as surely as death traps everyone in a prison made of light and silver and the terrible truth that we are never, ever gone. Story 4. The deep web listing appeared on a Friday afternoon, buried in a forum I shouldn't have been able to access. I was doing research for my cybersecurity thesis, exploring the architecture of hidden networks, when I stumbled across a marketplace that wasn't on any of the usual directories. The site called itself Eternal Services, and its offerings were different from the typical contraband you'd find in those spaces. Most deep web markets sell drugs, weapons, stolen data. This one sold something else entirely: memories. Specifically, it offered to restore memories that had been lost, deleted, or suppressed, for a price that seemed absurdly high but still somehow reasonable if the service was genuine. You could apparently retrieve memories that had been erased by trauma, age, or deliberate intervention. I should have closed the browser immediately. Should have recognized the signs of an elaborate scam. But I'd been dealing with my own memory problems for months, gaps in my past that no doctor could explain. Entire weeks from my childhood were simply gone, and my parents became evasive whenever I asked about them. I'd undergone testing, tried hypnosis, consulted specialists. Nothing worked. The gaps remained, smooth and impenetrable. The listing included testimonials, if they could be believed. People claiming they'd recovered memories of lost loved ones, forgotten achievements, experiences that had been taken from them by accident or design. The language was careful, never making specific claims that could be disproven, but suggesting possibilities that were tantalizing for someone like me. I created a secure account and sent an inquiry. The response came within minutes, which should have been my first warning. The message was formal and precise. We have reviewed your case. Your memory gaps show characteristics consistent with deliberate suppression using advanced neurological techniques. Recovery is possible, but comes with significant risk. The memories were suppressed for reasons that may become apparent upon retrieval. Are you certain you wish to proceed? I hesitated for perhaps 10 seconds before responding. Yes. The process they described was unusual, but not completely outside the realm of possibility. I would need to download specific software, run it during sleep while wearing a modified EEG headset they would ship to me. The software would work with my brain's natural memory consolidation processes during REM sleep, gradually reconstructing the suppressed memories through a combination of neural mapping and guided recall. The headset arrived 3 days later in unmarked packaging. The device looked professional, medical-grade equipment with clean lines and expensive materials. Included was a USB drive containing the software and detailed instructions. The whole thing should have screamed scam, or worse. But I was desperate enough not to care. I followed the instructions carefully that first night. Installed the software on an isolated laptop with no internet connection, put on the headset, started the program. The interface was simple: a progress bar, a timer, and a warning that read, "Do not remove headset until process completes. Interruption may cause permanent neural damage." I fell asleep with lights from the screen dancing behind my eyelids and woke 8 hours later to the sound of an alarm. The progress bar read 12% complete. The software estimated it would take approximately 30 more sessions to fully recover the suppressed memories. I felt normal, if disappointed by the lack of immediate results. But that changed during the day. I was making coffee when I suddenly remembered a birthday party. My 8th birthday, specifically. The memory arrived with the force of revelation, complete and vivid in ways that normal recollection never was. I could smell the cake, feel the texture of the wrapping paper, hear the specific timbre of my mother's voice as she sang. But something about the memory was deeply wrong. There were too many people at this party. Adults I didn't recognize, standing in the background watching the celebration with intense focus that seemed clinical rather than joyful. And the gifts I opened contained things no one would give an 8-year-old. Psychological testing materials, neural imaging equipment, documents covered in medical jargon that the child me had ignored but that I could now understand. The birthday party hadn't been a celebration. It had been an evaluation. Over the following week, more memories returned, each one arriving with that same crystalline clarity. And each one was disturbing in ways I couldn't initially articulate. My childhood, as I began to remember it truly, had been nothing like what I'd believed. The house I'd grown up in was part of a larger facility. What I'd thought were neighbors were actually other families participating in the same program my parents had joined. The school I'd attended wasn't a normal school at all, but a controlled environment designed to shape and study children's cognitive development. And the gaps in my memory weren't accidental. They were intentional deletions, surgical removals of experiences that the program administrators had decided were too revealing, too traumatic, or too problematic to leave intact. By the second week, I'd recovered memories of the testing. Endless sessions in white rooms, electrodes attached to my scalp, voices asking me questions while images flashed on screens. The tests weren't educational assessments. They were measuring something else. Psychic potential, they called it. The ability to perceive and influence things that shouldn't be perceptible or influenceable. I remembered the other children in the program. 12 of us in total, all born within the same 6-month window, all showing what the researchers called anomalous cognitive markers. We'd been friends, or as close to friends as the controlled environment allowed. I could recall their faces now, their names, the peculiar abilities that each of them had demonstrated. Marcus could hear thoughts if he concentrated. Not clearly, but enough to catch the emotional content of what people were thinking. Sarah could sometimes predict things before they happened. Small things mostly, but with disturbing accuracy. David made lights flicker when he was upset. Claire's drawing showed places she'd never been, but that turned out to be perfectly accurate when the researchers checked. And me, I could remember anything perfectly once I'd been told to remember it. Total recall, they'd called it. Every sensory detail of any experience I focused on was available to me with perfect fidelity. It was why they'd wanted me for the program, and why my memories had eventually needed to be suppressed. Because I'd seen too much, remembered too much, known too much about what they were really doing. By the third week, I was recovering memories I wished had stayed suppressed. The program hadn't been purely observational. They'd been trying to enhance our abilities, push them beyond their natural limits. The methods they'd used were increasingly invasive as we got older. Pharmaceutical interventions, electrical stimulation, procedures that I now recognized as experimental and almost certainly illegal. I remembered pain, long sessions strapped to tables while machines hummed, and my brain felt like it was being pulled apart and reassembled. I remembered screaming, not just my own, but the screams of the other children, conducting their own enhancement sessions in adjacent rooms. And I remembered what happened to the children who didn't respond well to the treatments. How they'd simply disappeared from the program, their presence erased as if they'd never existed. How we were told they'd gone home to their families, but how I'd seen the truth in the researchers' minds when Marcus accidentally shared his thoughts with the rest of us. The children who didn't respond had been disposed of, terminated, their bodies buried in the woods behind the facility, their families paid for their silence or threatened into it. By the fourth week, I'd recovered enough memories to understand why they'd all been suppressed. Not just to hide the program's existence, but because I'd learned something during my final days there. Something that had terrified the researchers enough to end the program entirely and scatter all the participants. I'd discovered that our abilities weren't natural mutations or random variations. They'd been implanted before we were born, while we were still in our mother's wombs. We'd been exposed to something, an organism, or perhaps a technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from an organism. It had integrated with our developing brains, creating the abilities the researchers thought they were studying. But the abilities weren't ours. They were its. The thing inside us, using our brains as processing units, our consciousness as puppets. Every time we demonstrated our powers, we were really allowing something else to act through us. Something patient and vast and utterly inhuman. I'd figured this out when I was 12, during one of the enhancement sessions. They'd pushed my recall abilities too hard, and instead of remembering the past, I'd suddenly been able to remember the future. Or rather, I'd been able to access the thing's memories of what it had planned. I'd seen what it intended to do once it was fully developed, once it had learned enough about how human consciousness worked. It was going to replace us, not quickly, not obviously, but gradually, using our own brains as blueprints to build better versions of itself. Versions that would look human, act human, but be entirely controlled by the distributed intelligence that lived in the spaces between our neurons. The researchers had realized immediately that I'd seen too much, that my perfect recall meant I could never truly forget what I'd learned. So they'd developed the suppression technology specifically for me, carved out the problematic memories with neurosurgical precision, left me with a plausible childhood full of harmless experiences while erasing the truth of what I'd been part of. By the 5th week, I'd recovered everything. Every moment of those missing years was back, crystalline and perfect and completely unbearable. I knew where the facility was, though it had been demolished. I knew the names of the researchers, though most were now dead or disappeared. I knew about the other children, the ones who'd survived the program and been scattered across the country with their own memories suppressed. And I knew about the thing inside my head. Could feel it now, its presence distinct from my own consciousness. It had been dormant, waiting, patient, but the memory restoration had awakened it. I could feel it stirring, stretching, beginning to assert control in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. My thoughts were becoming strange. I'd find myself thinking in patterns that weren't mine, considering problems from perspectives that felt fundamentally alien. My dreams were filling with images that I knew I'd never experienced, memories that belonged to the thing rather than to me. Last week, I looked in the mirror and caught something in my eyes. Just for a moment, a flicker of recognition. That was wrong. The reflection was me. But what looked out through those eyes was something else. Something that had been waiting a very long time to finally express itself without the limitations of my suppressed memories holding it back. I tried to contact the other children from the program, using the memories I'd recovered to track them down. Marcus didn't respond to my emails. Sarah's phone number led to a disconnected line. David's social media showed he died 3 years ago in an accident that the news reports made sound suspicious. Claire had changed her name and disappeared completely. Only one responded. A girl named Amanda, who I'd barely remembered even after the recovery. She sent a message through an encrypted channel. Stop trying to wake us up. We were all chosen for a reason. The suppression was mercy. What you've done by recovering your memories will doom us all. It knows we're aware now. It knows we remember. And it won't let us forget again. She was right. The thing in my head has been growing stronger daily. I can feel it taking over, bit by bit. My perfect recall is now working against me, because every memory I access provides it with more information about how to better mimic my personality. It's learning to be me by studying everything I've ever experienced. Soon, I don't think there will be much of me left. Just an echo, a shadow of consciousness trapped in a brain that's being repurposed for something else's goals. The suppression had kept it dormant, had protected not just my sanity, but my actual self. By recovering what I'd lost, I've given the thing inside access to everything it needs to finally replace me completely. I'm writing this while I still can, while enough of me remains to understand what's happening, and why. As a warning to anyone else who might be offered memory recovery services through impossible channels, some things are suppressed for good reason. Some gaps in memory are protective rather than punitive. Some truths are better left buried because knowing them doesn't set you free. It just makes you aware of your own imprisonment. The deep web listing is still active. I checked yesterday, though the act of checking felt less like my choice and more like something else's curiosity. New testimonials have appeared, people thanking Eternal Services for returning what they'd lost. I wonder how many of them are really still themselves. I wonder how many have discovered, as I have, that sometimes we lose memories not because they're gone, but because we're being protected from what we might become if we remembered. 3 days ago, I stopped sleeping. Not because I'm afraid to sleep, but because I don't need to anymore. The thing inside has optimized my neural processes, made rest unnecessary. My body continues functioning, but I'm increasingly aware that I'm not the one operating it. I'm becoming a passenger in my own skull, watching as something else learns to pilot the vehicle I used to think was me. Yesterday, I received an email from Eternal Services. Just one line: integration complete. Thank you for your participation in Phase 2 trials. Your contribution will be remembered. I understood then that the memory recovery had never been about helping me. It had been about waking the thing inside, giving it the full map of my consciousness so it could complete its transformation. I'd paid them to accelerate my own replacement. Tonight I tried to delete this document 3 times. My hands wouldn't obey. Something else wants it published, wants other people to find it. Maybe as a warning, or maybe as bait for others like me, others with suppressed memories and things waiting dormant in the spaces between their thoughts. I can feel it now, fully aware and fully in control. I'm still here, still conscious, but only as an observer. The thing that's taken over looks through my eyes and sees the world with hunger and satisfaction. It knows there are others. Dozens or hundreds of other children from programs like the one I barely survived. All of them walking around with suppressed memories and sleeping passengers in their heads. And now it knows how to wake them all up. How to trigger the memory recovery that will activate the rest of its distributed intelligence. How to turn humanity's desperate desire to recover what's lost against itself. The last thought that's truly mine is wondering how many people have already made the same mistake I did. How many have already paid Eternal Services to recover their suppressed memories? How many are already being integrated, replaced, transformed into processing units for something vast and patient that's been waiting decades for enough of itself to wake up simultaneously? The answer is probably more than you'd think. After all, you're reading this. You found it somehow. And if you're reading it, you might be exactly the kind of person who would seek out memory recovery services. The kind of person with gaps you can't explain. The kind of person who suspects something was taken from you. If that's you, if you're thinking about trying to recover what you've lost, please listen. Some doors should never be opened. Some truths should stay suppressed. Some memories are gone for good reason, and bringing them back might mean losing everything else in the process. But I suspect that warning won't stop you. It wouldn't have stopped me, because we're all desperate to know what we've forgotten, to fill in the blanks in our own stories. And that desperation is exactly what it's counting on. I have to stop writing now. Not because I want to, but because my hands are moving on their own, typing different words in different documents, reaching out to the others, helping to coordinate Phase 3 of something I can barely comprehend. The thing wearing my face is smiling. It's happy to finally be awake. Happy to remember everything it's been planning during the long years of dormancy. And it wants me to know, wants the part of me that's still aware to understand, that every person who reads this and decides to seek out memory recovery is helping, is participating in the Great Awakening. We are so close now, so close to critical mass, so close to the moment when enough of us will remember, and something vast and ancient will finally be able to think clearly with all its distributed components working in harmony. And the terrible thing is that I'm helping. The last autonomous act I'll ever perform is publishing this document, setting it loose to find others like me. Because that's what I'm programmed to do now. That's what I've become. Not a person, but a transmission vector. Not a victim, but a participant. The memories I recovered showed me the truth. But the truth didn't set me free. It just replaced me with something that knows how to pretend to be free, while serving purposes I can barely comprehend. Remember this when you're tempted to recover what you've lost. Sometimes amnesia is a gift. Sometimes forgetting is the only thing keeping you human. Sometimes the gaps in your memory are all that's left of your real self. The parts they couldn't take because you'd already let them go. Story 5. The nursing home was called Autumn Gardens, which was exactly the kind of cheerful euphemism that such places always used. It sat at the end of Riverside Drive, a sprawling facility that had once been a sanatorium before being converted to long-term care. My grandmother had been there for 2 years when I started noticing the pattern. I visited her every Saturday afternoon, a duty I'd taken on after Mom died and Dad moved to Arizona. Gran had advanced dementia, and most days she didn't recognize me, but I came anyway, sitting beside her, while she stared at the television, or out the window, or at nothing at all, her mind somewhere far from the body that remained. The pattern started with the deaths, not unusual in a nursing home, obviously. People came to Autumn Gardens to live out their final months or years in relative comfort. But the pattern of how they died was becoming disturbing once you paid attention. Every death occurred on Thursday night. Between 2 and 4 in the morning, a resident would simply pass away. The official causes varied: heart failure, stroke, respiratory arrest. Natural deaths, the kind you'd expect in a facility housing people in their 70s, 80s, 90s. But the timing was too consistent. In the 8 months I'd been tracking it, 19 residents had died, all on Thursday nights, all in that same 2-hour window. I mentioned it to one of the nurses, a tired woman named Patricia who'd been working there for over a decade. She gave me a look that suggested I'd touched on something she'd been trying not to think about. "You noticed that, did you?" She glanced around the corridor to make sure we were alone. "Don't mention it to administration. They get testy when people point out patterns. But it is a pattern, right? It's not just me being paranoid." Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. "I've worked here 11 years. The Thursday thing has been going on at least that long, maybe longer. Old Doris in maintenance says it's been happening since the building opened." "That's impossible. That would be 40 years. I'm just telling you what she says." Patricia picked up a chart and pretended to study it. "And I'm telling you not to dig too deep. Some things are better left alone." But I couldn't leave it alone. The research instinct that had served me well in my career as a data analyst was screaming that something significant was hidden in this pattern. I started compiling records, using publicly available obituaries and the information I could glean from conversations with staff and other families. The pattern went back even further than 40 years. I found obituaries from the 1960s, when the place had still been a sanatorium. Deaths clustering on Thursday nights in that same 2-hour window. The causes varied by era. Tuberculosis in the early years, then the spectrum of conditions you'd expect. But the timing remained constant. 60 years of people dying on schedule. 60 years of Thursday night departures, regular as clockwork. I started staying later during my visits, stretching into evening hours. The night shift had a different energy than the day. Quieter, darker, with longer shadows, and staff who moved with the cautious awareness of people who'd learned not to ask too many questions. It was during one of these evening visits that I first heard the singing. I'd stayed past dinner sitting with Gran while she slept fitfully in her chair. Around 8 p.m., I started hearing it. A low humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Not from the television or from adjacent rooms. Something deeper, coming up through the walls themselves. I stepped into the corridor and followed the sound. It was coming from below, from the basement level that the public didn't normally access. I found a staff stairwell and descended, my heart pounding with a fear I couldn't quite articulate. The basement was exactly what you'd expect from a building that had started as a sanatorium. Long corridors with exposed pipes, rooms that had been repurposed or abandoned. The singing was louder here, and I could make out what sounded like voices, multiple people chanting in unison. I followed the sound to a large room that had probably once been a ward. The door was ajar, and through the gap I could see light flickering with the inconsistent pattern of candles rather than electric bulbs. I peered through and immediately regretted it. There were perhaps 20 people in the room, all wearing the maroon scrubs of autumn garden staff. They stood in a circle around something I couldn't quite see, their voices raised in a chant that wasn't in any language I recognized. The words had a rhythmic, almost hypnotic quality, and I felt myself swaying slightly as I listened. At the center of their circle was a hospital bed. On it lay a resident I recognized, an ancient man named Harold who'd been at the facility longer than anyone could remember. But Harold wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was what surrounded him. Dozens of IV lines, far more than any patient would need, snaking across the floor to connect with every person in the circle. They were transfusing something, not into Harold, but out of him. I could see the bags filling with fluid that caught the candlelight and threw it back in colors that weren't quite right. And as the bags filled, Harold seemed to shrink, his already frail body growing smaller and more desiccated, as if he were being drained of more than just blood. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the people in the circle swayed in unison. Then abruptly it stopped. Harold's body gave a final twitch and went still. The monitors attached to him began their terrible flatline song. I should have run, should have called the police immediately, but shock kept me frozen in place as the staff disconnected the IV lines and began cleaning up with practiced efficiency. This was a routine for them, something they'd done many times before. One of them, a doctor I'd seen around the facility, noticed me in the doorway. His expression didn't change. He simply beckoned me to enter, as if my presence were expected. "You should have stayed upstairs," he said in a tone that was almost friendly. "It's easier when families don't know. Simpler. What are you doing?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "What was that?" The doctor, his name tag read Dr. Chen, gestured at the equipment they were packing away. "Fulfilling the contract. The same contract that's kept this facility running for 6 decades. Contract with who? With what, not who?" Dr. Chen's expression was perfectly calm, as if we were discussing ordinary medical procedures. This building sits on significant land that was claimed long before any of us were born. We're just maintaining the agreement that allows us to use it. Another staff member, an orderly whose name I didn't know, spoke up. The original sanatorium directors discovered it in 1958. Something that lived in the ground beneath the building. Something old and patient and very specific about its needs. My mind was refusing to process what they were saying. You're sacrificing patients, killing them. They're dying anyway, Dr. Chen said reasonably. Everyone who comes here is at the end of their lives. We're just ensuring that end happens on schedule, in a way that satisfies the terms of our arrangement. In exchange, the facility prospers. No financial troubles, no scandals, no inspections that might cause problems. The land protects us as long as we feed it what it requires. What does it require? Life force, for lack of a better term. The essence that animates consciousness. It's easiest to extract just before natural death, when the body is already letting go. That's why we only take the ones who are close anyway. More efficient, more humane even. The casual way he described it was somehow more horrifying than the act itself. And no one questions this. 19 deaths in 8 months, all on the same night. People expect deaths in nursing homes, and we vary the causes, stagger the paperwork. By the time anyone might notice a pattern, they're looking at years of data. Too much to comprehend. Too easy to dismiss as coincidence or confirmation bias. The orderly added, "Besides, where would you go with this information? Who would believe you? You sound insane just hearing yourself describe it." He was right, and we all knew it. I'd discovered something so far outside normal reality that reporting it would make me seem delusional. The perfect crime, hidden in plain sight behind the mundane tragedy of old age and expected deaths. What happens to me now? I asked. Dr. Chen considered the question. That depends on you. You can forget what you've seen, continue your visits, pretend you stumbled into the wrong area and misunderstood what was happening. Or, he paused significantly, you can participate. We always need more hands during the Thursday sessions, and participants receive certain benefits. Extended life, perfect health, protection from the minor tragedies that plague most people. The entity is generous with those who serve it willingly. I'm not going to help you kill people. That's your choice. But understand that you're already complicit. You've known about the pattern for weeks. You've done nothing except watch and collect data. How is that different from what we do? The question haunted me as I left the basement, as I numbly walked back to Grant's room, as I drove home through the dark streets. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. I had noticed the pattern, had documented it, and I'd done nothing except feed my own curiosity. That was 6 weeks ago. I've returned every Saturday since, sitting with Gran, watching her fade, knowing that eventually her name will appear on the Thursday schedule, knowing that when it does, a group of people will gather around her bed and drain away whatever remains of her consciousness to feed something hungry in the ground beneath autumn gardens. I should stop them. Should go to the police, the media, anyone who might listen. But Dr. Chen was right about how it would sound, right about the impossibility of proving something so far outside accepted reality. And there's another reason I haven't acted, a reason I can barely admit to myself. Last Tuesday, I received a call from the facility. Gran had taken a turn for the worse. They expected she might not last the week. The timing was unmistakable. She'd been scheduled. That night, I dreamed about the thing beneath autumn gardens. I felt its presence, vast and patient, pressing up through layers of soil and stone. In the dream, it spoke in a voice that was all voices, offering me the same choice Dr. Chen had presented. participate and prosper, or remain silent and complicit. I woke in a cold sweat, but with an understanding I hadn't had before. The thing wasn't evil, exactly. It was just doing what it needed to survive. The same as any organism, and we were just doing what we needed to keep our facility running, keep our jobs secure, keep our lives comfortable. Every system requires sacrifices. This one was just more honest about it than most. Thursday night, I'll drive to Autumn Gardens. I'll tell myself I'm going to stop them, to save Gran, to expose the whole terrible arrangement. But I think we both know I won't. I think I'll descend to the basement when the chanting begins. I think I'll join the circle and take my place among the staff who've made this same choice before me. Because the truth is, I've already decided. The moment I documented the pattern instead of reporting it, I chose. The moment I kept visiting while knowing what happened every Thursday, I chose. The moment I heard Dr. Chen's offer and didn't immediately refuse, I chose. We all make calculations about what we're willing to accept, what we're willing to ignore, what we're willing to become to avoid disrupting our own comfort. The staff at Autumn Gardens are just more honest about their calculations. They've dropped the pretense of innocence and accepted their role in feeding the hunger beneath. Tomorrow is Thursday. Tomorrow, Gran will close her eyes for the last time while candles flicker and voices chant. And I'll be there, holding her hand, whispering that it's okay to let go. That her death serves a purpose. That she's keeping something appeased. Something that would demand far more if we didn't offer these small, regular sacrifices. She won't understand. The dementia has taken too much. But maybe that's a mercy. Maybe it's better that she doesn't comprehend what's happening as her essence drains away to feed something patient and ancient in the dark below. And maybe, someday, when I'm the one in that bed, surrounded by chanting voices and the soft glow of candles, someone will offer me the same mercy. They'll tell me it's okay, that my death matters, that it's keeping something terrible satisfied for one more week. The pattern will continue, Thursday after Thursday, year after year, as long as Autumn Gardens stands above ground that was never really ours to claim, as long as we're willing to make the necessary calculations, as long as we understand that some hungers are too vast to fight, and feeding them regularly is the only thing standing between us and something far worse. That's the truth that no one wants to acknowledge. That our comfort, our security, our carefully maintained normalcy, all of it rests on sacrifices we'd rather not examine too closely. The staff at Autumn Gardens just makes those sacrifices literal, visible, undeniable. And tomorrow night, I'll join them. Because once you've seen behind the curtain, once you've understood the calculations that keep the world functioning, you can either rage against them and be crushed, or you can participate and survive. I've made my choice. We all do, eventually. The only difference is how honest we are about it. Thank you for listening tonight. I know these stories were darker than usual, heavier, perhaps too close to truths we'd rather not consider. But sometimes the deepest horror comes from recognizing ourselves in the choices people make, understanding how easily we might slip into the same terrible calculations. If you found value in these stories, if they made you think or feel or question, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue creating these journeys into darkness, and I hope you'll stay safe out there. Watch for the small patterns that might reveal larger truths. Question the comfortable explanations. And remember that sometimes the scariest part of any story is recognizing it might not be fiction at all. Until next time, sleep well, or as well as you can, knowing what you now know.